My name is Dries D'Hooghe. I have been with Zero Waste for 6 years now. I'm their VP of Products and Services and responsible for the creation of new products and new services. Besides that, I'm also involved in implementations as a practice lead and as a PLM consultant. My background is maritime engineering, which is a combination of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and civil engineering. I guess I couldn't figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And this interest in all kinds of different things, that's something that's a thread through my career. I started to work in the PLM space in 2000 for a company called Agile Software as their product manager, and then later on became their product strategist. I was part of the acquisition by Oracle, and then after that acquisition, I struck out on my own as an independent consultant. Zero Waste was one of my customers, and so after a couple of years, I decided to join them as an employee. My background as an engineer helps me to understand the engineer's mindset in terms of developing new products. My expertise with compliance helps me bring in the compliance angle, and where most companies fall short, in my experience, is that interconnection between the engineering side and the compliance side. And how do you make your engineers think about compliance without overburdening them? One of the other things I notice is that in a lot of cases, the true compliance experts have no idea on how the engineers actually do things, and they can come up with very nice requirements of what you should be doing, but it's not feasible to do in an engineering environment. What I notice about most compliance implementations and compliance experts is that they don't know how to marry the engineering discipline to the compliance requirements. For example, in one of my customers, they just have this compliance requirement that they need to be ROS, REACH, and so forth compliant. Now, that requires a thorough analysis in terms of what substances are in your products and quantities of those substances and so forth, concentrations of those substances. But in the very early product design life cycles, that's too much work. So you are just caring about, are we ROS and REACH compliant, or are we ROS compliant? Yes, no, does my product contain a REACH substance or not? That's enough. And so that helps you to filter out those suppliers that don't meet the requirements, or those products or parts that don't meet the requirements. And creating this as a process that works for the engineers, as well as the product development progresses, works more and more for the compliance side to make sure that your product is compliant. That is the challenge, and that is the thing that I really focus on. One of the recent developments, I would say, in compliance is just the sheer volume of it. There's so much, and it's so various, that you have now companies specializing on certain areas of compliance. And what that means is that from a compliance perspective, nobody, especially not the PLM companies, can manage that breadth of data and information that is needed. So you have now these specialized companies focusing on a particular piece of compliance, doing it very well, better than any of the PLM companies could ever do it themselves. But that information still needs to come to PLM so that you can make trade-offs and design decisions. That is the biggest, in my mind, the biggest change that's been happening. In the earlier days, PLMs were trying to put all that information in the PLM system. Right now, that information resides elsewhere, but it requires an integration to the PLM system and provide high-level status information back into the PLM that is sufficient for the engineers, the product designers, and the project managers to make decisions. For example, the company I have been working with, they used to bring all their information into in their case, Agile PLM. And that was fine. That was fine when we're talking about ROS and when we're talking early stages of REACH. But now they have regulatory registrations. They have not just ROS and REACH, they have Prop 65. They have a whole bunch of other things that they need to be compliant with. It becomes so much that just managing PLM to keep up to date with these things would be a full-time job. It is not manageable, it's not doable anymore. So they decided to externalize everything, give it to specialized companies, and that means that their compliance organization has multiple systems they are working with, mostly cloud-based, that are doing the deep analysis, which is the thing that only the compliance folks are interested in. Consequently, they're bringing in the status information. This part meets these requirements based on the deep analysis we've done in this other company. Bring that into your PLM system, roll that up to your bill of materials, roll that up to your structures, so that you know at a product level what the compliance status is of your part in your product. Has it been verified? Is it compliant? Can we ship? And so forth. That's the thing that the PLM systems are good in, and that the PLM systems should keep doing, but the details need to move out of PLM, and more they are. Current changes in compliance, I would summarize them as more and ever faster changing. The landscape of compliance has not really changed. I mean, it's just the sheer volume of the requirements that you have to be compliant with, and staying up to date with what has changed, where has it changed, what are the potential exemptions that are still allowed and not allowed. That's a big task for any compliance person to keep track of. It's also one of the reasons, as I mentioned before, why the PLM systems are no longer suitable to manage compliance themselves, but they're fine as a concentrator, if you want, of the compliance statuses. The role of PLM in this new compliance environment, in my mind, is that it acts as the gatekeeper still for product development. It brings the compliance requirements or the compliance statuses together, and it allows engineers and designers to make trade-offs. That traditional role of PLM, in my mind, has not changed. It's more information than ever before. Design for compliance is now a thing, as well as all the other manufacturing practices. Types of compliance that are the most important if you are thinking about shipping internationally or selling internationally, as well as domestically, is, of course, you have all the regulatory registration requirements. I mean, practically everything nowadays contains radios, and as everybody knows, those are heavily regulated. You have to be registered in all the geographies that you are shipping to. Environmental compliance, same thing. All these regions have environmental restrictions or regulations or directives that you have to be compliant with. So knowing what those are, knowing that they are not impacting the ability for you to sell or ship into a geography is really important. How does data content management services impact compliance or product development? It's fairly simple. They have much more expertise than the regular person. They can do things cheaper. They can actually provide you and collect the data much cheaper than anybody could do it on their own. And they have the staff to keep up to date on anything changing in terms of requirements for compliance. So from a cost-benefit perspective, they're the most cost-effective way to actually collect the data, summarize the data, provide a status for that data, and send it back to PLM. What to look for in a content provider depends on the company, of course, depends on your products, depends on your materials and parts that you're using. So I would say, look at the overlap, look at what they have in terms of your parts, your materials, look at how fresh the content is and how often they can refresh that content so that you are always up to date, and then also have a really good idea of how fast they can collect new information when compliance requirements change. If PLM is the right platform to manage compliance, in one short answer, not really. It's the best tool to manage the statuses for compliance. It is definitely no longer the best tool to manage all the detailed compliance information. That time's over. 5-8 years ago, that was still the case. Nowadays, no PLM system can handle the volume and can handle the change.